Taemin Kim stepped off the transport ship and into the most beautiful place he had ever seen. The Galactic Council Hall stretched out before him like a crystal palace made of light and glass. Tall towers reached up into the sky, and bridges of pure energy connected them like glowing ribbons. Everything sparkled and shimmered in colors that had no names, but something was wrong. Something that made his skin crawl. It was completely silent. Not the good kind of silence you might find in a library or a peaceful garden. This was different. This was the silence of 1,000 voices that should have been speaking but were not. Taemin could see hundreds of beings moving through the halls. Some walked on 2 legs like humans, others slithered on tentacles, and some floated through the air on wings that looked like soap bubbles, but none of them made a sound. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," said Sojin Park, appearing beside him like a ghost. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. "I am your mentor. Try not to speak unless I tell you to." Taemin opened his mouth to ask why, but Sojin held up her hand. She pointed to a group of blue creatures with long necks who were standing nearby. They had no mouths that Taemin could see, but somehow they were talking to each other. Colors flowed across their skin like living paintings. Their necks swayed back and forth in a dance that looked almost like music made visible. The Corvani speak through color patterns. Sojin whispered so quietly that Taemin could barely hear her. "They are discussing trade routes to the outer systems." Next to the blue creatures stood beings that looked like walking crystals. Light pulsed through their bodies in quick flashes like Morse code made of rainbows. Beyond them, a group of furry animals the size of bears were releasing sweet-smelling clouds into the air. "How do you know what they are all saying?" Taemin asked, forgetting to whisper. His voice rang out across the hall like a bell in a tomb. Every single being in sight stopped moving. The blue creature's colors went completely white. The crystal beings' lights went out. The furry creatures stopped making their sweet clouds and fell to the ground, pressing their faces to the floor. Some of the aliens ran away. Others began to bow so low that Taemin thought they might hurt themselves. A few of the smaller creatures started to shake with what looked like fear. "What did I do?" Taemin whispered, but even his whisper seemed too loud now. Sojin grabbed his arm and pulled him toward a side passage. As they walked, Taemin saw the aliens slowly returning to their business, but they kept looking at him with expressions he could not read. Were they afraid of him? Did they hate him? Or was it something else entirely? "You spoke," Sojin said when they were alone. "In 50 years, the only voices heard in these halls belong to humans. Everyone else communicates without sound. Why?" Sojin looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were sad, like someone remembering a terrible dream. "That is a long story. One you will learn in time. For now, just know that we are the only ones who can safely use our voices here." She led him through corridors filled with more wonders than Taemin could count. Walls made of living metal that rippled like water. Floors that felt soft as grass but looked like polished stone. Windows that showed not the outside world, but distant stars and planets that seemed close enough to touch. They passed meeting rooms where dozens of different species sat around tables that floated in the air. The aliens communicated in ways Taemin had never imagined. Some touched each other with tentacles that glowed when they made contact. Others held up complex patterns of lights that shifted and changed like visual languages. A few released chemicals into the air that other members of their species breathed in and seemed to understand, but none of them spoke with voices. "How long has it been like this?" Taemin asked. 50 years, Sojin replied. "Since the end of the Silent Wars." The name sent a chill down Taemin's spine, but before he could ask more questions, they arrived at the heart of the council halls. The central chamber was enormous, with seats arranged in circles that rose up like the inside of a giant bowl. At the very center was a small platform surrounded by what looked like empty air, but Taemin could sense that something was different about that space. "The heart chamber," Sojin said. "This is where I work. Where you will work once you are ready." "What do we do there?" "We speak for those who cannot." As if her words were a signal, beings began to enter the great chamber. They came in groups organized by species, each group staying together like schools of fish. The blue Corvani took seats in the upper levels. The crystal beings arranged themselves in perfect geometric patterns. Creatures that looked like walking flowers swayed gently in one section, while beings made of pure energy hovered near the ceiling. Soon, thousands of aliens filled the chamber, all completely silent. They turned their attention toward the heart chamber, and Taemin realized they were waiting for something. Or someone. "It is time," Sojin said. She walked down toward the central platform, her footsteps echoing in the silence like drops of water in a deep well. Taemin watched as she stepped into the heart chamber. The moment she crossed into that space, something changed. The air itself seemed to become thicker, more real. Sojin stood in the center and took a deep breath. Then she began to speak. Her voice filled the chamber, warm and clear and completely human. She spoke about trade agreements and resource sharing, about conflicts that needed resolving and discoveries that should be celebrated. But somehow Taemin knew that the words coming from her mouth were not entirely her own. The aliens listened with an attention that bordered on worship. Some of the crystal beings pulsed with gentle light. The Corvani's colors shifted in slow, peaceful patterns. The flower-like creatures swayed in rhythm with Sojin's words. She was not just speaking to them, Taemin realized. She was speaking for them. When Sojin finished and stepped out of the heart chamber, the aliens began to file out of the chamber in the same silent order they had arrived. Within minutes, the great hall was empty except for Taemin and his mentor. Why? Taemin asked. Why can only humans speak here? Sojin looked at him with those sad, knowing eyes. Because we are the only ones who can do so safely. The only ones whose thoughts truly belong to ourselves alone. She started walking toward the exit, but Taemin did not follow. He stared at the heart chamber, trying to understand what he had just witnessed. What happened in the silent wars? He called after her. Sojin stopped but did not turn around. Something terrible, she said. Something that must never happen again. As they left the great chamber, Taemin felt the weight of a responsibility he did not yet understand, settling on his shoulders. Whatever had happened 50 years ago, whatever had made the galaxy go silent, he was now part of the solution. He was learning to become a voice for those who had lost their own. 3 days had passed since Taemin's first day at the council halls, and he could not stop thinking about what he had seen. Every time he watched Sojin speak in the heart chamber, he felt like he was missing something important. The way the aliens listened was not normal. It was like they were hungry for every word that came from her mouth, but nobody would give him real answers. Sojin just told him to be patient. The other human diplomat smiled and said he would understand in time. Even the computer system seemed to have missing files whenever he tried to research the silent wars. It was like someone had deliberately hidden the truth. That was why Taemin found himself walking through the old section of Nexus Prime, looking for Woo-Bin Lee. If anyone would tell him what really happened, it would be the cultural attaché who spent his days studying alien history. He found Woo-Bin in a dusty library that looked like it had not been visited in years. The older man was sitting at a table covered with books and data tablets, his gray hair messy from running his hands through it. When he saw Taemin, he did not look happy. "You should not be here," Woo-Bin said without looking up from his work. "I need to know about the silent wars." "No, you do not." "Yes, I do." Taemin sat down across from him. "I cannot do my job if I do not understand why we are the only ones allowed to speak." "Why are they all so afraid of voices?" Woo-Bin finally looked at him. His eyes were tired, like someone who had seen too much. "They are not afraid of voices. They are afraid of thoughts." "What does that mean?" Woo-Bin was quiet for a long time. Then he pushed one of his data tablets toward Taemin. On the screen was a picture of a beautiful city with tall spires that reached toward the clouds. But something was wrong with the picture. The spires were cracked and broken. The streets were empty. "This was Corvani Prime," Woo-Bin said, "home to 12 billion souls. Look at the date on this picture." Taemin looked. The picture was taken 52 years ago. What happened to it? The same thing that happened to hundreds of worlds during the silent wars. Everyone just stopped. Woo-Bin touched the tablet screen, and the picture changed. Now it showed the same city, but from closer up. Taemin could see bodies in the streets. Not dead bodies. These people were still breathing, still moving. But their eyes were empty. They walked in circles or stood completely still, doing nothing at all. "I do not understand," Taemin said. "Before the wars, every species in the galaxy communicated through direct mind contact, not like humans with our simple words and sounds. They shared thoughts the way we share air. Imagine being able to put your exact feelings, your memories, your ideas directly into someone else's head." Taemin tried to imagine it, but the idea made him uncomfortable. "That sounds wonderful?" Yes, that is what everyone thought. No more misunderstandings, no more translations that got things wrong. Perfect communication. Woo-Bin's voice was bitter. But perfect communication has a dark side. He changed the picture again. This time it showed what looked like a battle, but not the kind Timon had ever seen in movies. There were no explosions or weapons. Instead, beings from different species stood facing each other with their eyes closed, perfectly still. But somehow Timon knew they were fighting. The Vorthak collective started it, Wubin continued. They were a hive mind species. All their thoughts were shared between every member of their race. They decided that other species would be better off if they shared thoughts the same way. So they began forcing their thoughts into other minds. Forcing? Mental invasion. Imagine someone breaking into your head and rearranging your thoughts to match theirs. The Vorthak believed they were helping. They thought individual thoughts were lonely and sad. Timon felt sick. What happened to the people they invaded? They became Vorthak. Not physically, but mentally. They thought Vorthak thoughts, believed Vorthak beliefs, wanted Vorthak goals. The original personality just disappeared. The picture on the tablet changed again. Now it showed a map of the galaxy with different colored dots representing different species. As Timon watched, the colors began to change. Blue dots became red as the Vorthak influence spread. Green became red. Yellow became red. Other species tried to fight back, Wubin said. The Zilani, who were natural telepaths, tried to shield minds from invasion. The Corvin created thought barriers. The Crystalline Collective built mental firewalls. But fighting mind-to-mind warfare meant opening your thoughts to attack. Every time someone tried to stop the Vorthak, they risked being converted themselves. How did it end? Wubin's face became even more serious. It got worse first. Much worse. The mental networks that all species use to communicate became infected with something called the Endless Echo. He touched the tablet again, and Timon heard something that made his blood freeze. It was not quite a sound and not quite a voice, but something in between. It repeated the same pattern over and over, a rising tone followed by silence, then the same tone again. Just hearing it for a few seconds made Timon want to cover his ears. That is what it sounded like inside people's heads, Wubin said, turning off the sound. A thought that consumed other thoughts. It spread through the mental networks like a virus. Every mind it touched became trapped in that endless loop. The people in the pictures were stuck repeating that same thought pattern forever. They could not think anything else. Could not want anything else. Could not be anything else. Timon stared at the tablet screen, trying to understand the horror of what Wubin was describing. How many? Billions. Entire star systems fell silent as the endless echo spread from mind to mind. The species that were not infected cut themselves off from their mental networks to avoid contamination, but that meant they could not communicate with anyone, even their own kind. What about humans? For the first time since they had started talking, Wubin smiled. But it was not a happy smile. Humans were considered primitive by galactic standards. We had no natural telepathic abilities. We could not share thoughts directly. Other species pitied us for being trapped in our individual minds. But that saved us. Yes, the endless echo could not infect thoughts that were not connected to the mental networks. Human minds were like isolated islands in an ocean of contaminated consciousness. When the plague spread through the galaxy, we were the only ones left who could think clearly. Timon began to understand. We were the only ones who could still communicate. The only ones whose words came from their own thoughts instead of from the echo or from Vorthak programming. When the surviving species realized this, they made a desperate choice. Wubin pulled up another picture. This one showed the first human speaker, a woman named Hanul Yun, standing in what looked like an early version of the heart chamber. Around her, aliens of dozens of species sat in absolute silence. They asked us to speak for them, to be their voice until they could find a way to communicate safely again. That was 50 years ago. And they still have not found a safe way? They are too afraid to try. The memory of the silent wars is still too fresh. Some species have developed limited communication methods. The color patterns you saw, the light signals, the chemical messages. But they will not risk direct thought sharing again. Timon looked at the picture of Hanul Yun. She looked tired but determined, like someone carrying a weight that was almost too heavy to bear. Is the endless echo still out there? He asked. Wubin nodded grimly. Dormant but not destroyed. It sleeps in the ruins of old mental networks, in abandoned telepathic devices, in the minds of those who were infected but managed to shut down their consciousness before it spread further. Every few years, someone finds a trace of it, and we have to be very careful about how we handle the discovery. So we really are the only ones who can safely speak. We are the only ones whose thoughts belong entirely to ourselves. Every word that comes from a human mouth is guaranteed to be a genuine human thought, not an echo or an invasion or a conversion. That is why the aliens listen to us with such reverence. We represent something they have lost, the ability to trust that thoughts and words are real. Tamian sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by what he had learned. The responsibility he had felt in the great chamber suddenly felt much heavier. How do we know what to say for them? He asked. Very carefully, Wu Bin replied, and with a lot of help from people like me who study their cultures and needs. It is not a perfect system, but it is the only one they trust. As Taiman left the library, he understood why the information about the silent wars was kept so quiet. It was not just history. It was a warning about what could happen if the galaxy ever tried to return to the old ways of communication. Taiman could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the empty faces from Wu Bin's pictures. People trapped in their own minds, repeating the same terrible thought over and over until they forgot how to be themselves. He had been at Nexus Prime for 2 weeks now, and each day brought new questions. How had humanity, the species everyone thought was primitive, become the most important voice in the galaxy? What exactly happened during the final days of the Silent Wars? And why did some of the older aliens look at him with something that seemed almost like guilt? The answers came from an unexpected source. Da-Yun Choi was the oldest human on Nexus Prime. She was 93 years old and had been there since the beginning of the human presence at the council halls. Most people left her alone because she was known to be difficult and unfriendly. But when Tamian found her sitting in the memorial garden, looking at a wall covered with names, he decided to take a chance. Excuse me, he said quietly. Are you Da-Yun Choi? She looked at him with eyes that were still sharp despite her age. Depends on who is asking. I am Taemin Kim. I am training to be a speaker. Another one. She turned back to the wall. Do you know what this is? Taemin looked at the names carved into the black stone. There were thousands of them, in dozens of different languages and symbols. A memorial? The humans who died in the silent wars. Not many people remember that we had casualties too. I thought humans were immune to the mental attacks. Da-Yun laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. Immune to mind invasion, yes, but not immune to guilt. She pointed to one name near the top of the wall. Captain Jinny Song. She commanded the ship that discovered what the Endless Echo really was. What do you mean? Da-Yun studied him for a moment, like she was deciding whether he could handle what she was about to tell him. Sit down, boy. This is not a story you want to hear standing up. Taemin sat on the bench beside her. Da-Yun was quiet for a long time, staring at the names on the wall. I was there, she finally said, during the final year of the wars. I was young, like you, and I thought I understood what was happening. The aliens were sick, we were helping them. Everything would work out fine. But I was wrong about almost everything. What really happened? The Endless Echo was not an accident. It was a weapon. The words hit Taemin like cold water. A weapon? Created by humans, Da-Yun said quietly. By a man named Suho Kang. Taemin felt the world shift around him. That cannot be true. Suho was a brilliant engineer who specialized in communication systems. When the war started, he was working on ways to help humans communicate with the aliens without using the mental networks. He wanted to build translation devices that could convert thoughts into words. Da-Yun pointed to another name on the wall. But Suho's daughter was on a colony world when the Vorthak invaded. He watched through the communication networks as she was converted, as her thoughts were replaced with Vorthak programming. She looked the same, sounded the same, but she was not his daughter anymore. So he created the Echo to fight back? He created it to destroy the entire mental network system. If thoughts could be used as weapons, then Suho decided that no one should be able to share thoughts at all. Taemin stared at the memorial wall, trying to process what he was hearing. He wanted to force everyone to communicate like humans. He told himself he was saving the galaxy. And maybe he was, in a way. The Endless Echo spread through the mental networks faster than any invasion could. But it did not just stop the Vorthak. It destroyed the ability of every species to safely share thoughts ever again. How many people did it kill? Not kill. That would have been kinder. The Echo trapped minds in a loop, but the bodies kept living. Billions of beings became prisoners in their own heads, aware, but unable to think new thoughts. Da-Yun stood up and walked closer to the wall. She touched one name with her finger. Captain Jin Song discovered what Suho had done. She tried to stop the echo from spreading, but it was too late. The damage was already done. What happened to Suho? He realized what he had created when the reports started coming in from the infected worlds. Entire civilizations reduced to empty shells, repeating the same mental pattern forever. He tried to fix it, to create an antidote, but the echo was designed too well. It could not be stopped. Dayun turned back to Taemin. Her eyes were wet with tears. Suho took his own life rather than face what he had done. But the echo kept spreading. Taemin felt sick. Everything he had learned about humans being the heroes of the silent wars was wrong. They were not the saviors, they were the ones who had broken the galaxy. Why did the aliens ask us to speak for them if we caused this? Because they were desperate. Because we were the only ones left who could think freely. And because in a twisted way Suho was right. The old system was dangerous. The Vorthak invasions proved that direct mind sharing could be used for terrible things. Dayun sat back down on the bench. Captain Jin spent the last months of her life working with alien survivors to create the protocol of voices. The idea that humans would serve as neutral speakers for all species until a safer form of communication could be developed. Did she think it would only be temporary? She hoped it would be. But fear is a powerful thing, Taemin. After the silent wars, no species wanted to risk opening their minds again. The color patterns, the light signals, the chemical messages, these are all ways of communicating without sharing actual thoughts. And the heart chamber? Designed by the surviving aliens as a psychically null zone. A place where thoughts cannot travel beyond the person thinking them. When we speak there, our words cannot carry mental contamination or invasion. It is the only place in the galaxy where speech is truly safe. Taemin looked at the memorial wall with new eyes. So we are not heroes. We are the ones responsible for the problem. We are both, Dayun said simply. One human broke the galaxy's ability to safely share thoughts. But thousands of other humans have spent the last 50 years serving as voices for those who lost their own. A young man approached them across the garden. Taemin recognized him as Hyunwoo Nam, a xenolinguist who worked with the translation protocols. Dayun, there you are. Sojin sent me to find Taemin. There has been an incident. What kind of incident? Taemin asked. Hyunwoo looked nervous. A research team found something in the ruins of an old Vorthak facility. Something that should not exist anymore. Dayun's face went pale. The echo? We think so. A dormant node that somehow survived the purges. The research team managed to contain it before it could spread, but... Hyunwoo hesitated. But there are signs that someone has been deliberately looking for echo fragments. Who would do that? Taemin asked. Someone who wants to finish what Suho started, Dayun said grimly. Or someone who wants to bring back the old ways of mental communication. As they walked back toward the council halls, Taemin felt the weight of history pressing down on him. He was part of a system that existed because of both the greatest failure and the greatest sacrifice in galactic history. Every time he would speak in the heart chamber, he would be continuing a tradition born from tragedy and maintained by guilt. But he was also beginning to understand something else. The aliens did not listen to human speakers with reverence despite what humans had done during the silent wars. They listened with reverence because of what humans were still doing, carrying the burden of being the galaxy's voice, generation after generation, as payment for the sin of one desperate father who tried to save his daughter and ended up breaking the minds of billions. The discovery of the dormant echo node changed everything. It meant the silent wars were not really over. Somewhere out there, someone was playing with forces that could destroy civilization again, and once again it might be up to humans to find a way to stop it. What do we do now? Taemin asked as they entered the halls. What we have always done, Dayun replied. We speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, and we pray that this time it will be enough. The silence of the great halls seemed different now, not peaceful but fragile, like something that could shatter at any moment, sending the galaxy back into the darkness of the silent wars. Taemin realized that his training as a speaker was about to become much more important than he had ever imagined. The news about the discovered echo fragments spread through the human sections of Nexus Prime like wildfire, but the aliens remained unaware. That was by design, Sojin explained to Taemin as she led him to a meeting he had not known was scheduled. We tell them about threats only when we have solutions, she said as they walked through corridors Taemin had never seen before. Fear is what created this system. More fear will not help anyone. They arrived at a conference room where the most senior humans on Nexus Prime were gathered. Taemin recognized some of them. Woo Bin Lee with his tired eyes, Da-Yun Choi looking even older than she had the day before. But there were others he had never met. Taemin, Sojin said, meet Dongjun Im, the chairman of the Speaker Council. Dongjun was a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of calm presence that made people want to listen to him. When he shook Taemin's hand, his grip was firm but gentle. So you are the young man who's been asking all the difficult questions, Dongjun said with a slight smile. Good. We need people who ask difficult questions. At the head of the table sat a woman Taemin had only seen in pictures. Hanul Yoon, the first human speaker, was now 87 years old. Her back was bent with age, but her eyes were still bright with intelligence. Sit down, child, Hanul said to Taemin. We have much to discuss. Dongjun activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy. Red dots marked the locations where echo fragments had been found over the years. There were more than Taemin had expected. In the 50 years since the Silent Wars ended, Dongjun said, we have found and destroyed 43 dormant echo nodes. Most were in the ruins of old mental communication networks. Some were hidden in abandoned telepathic devices. A few were discovered in the minds of survivors who had managed to isolate the infection before it consumed them completely. But this latest discovery is different, added a woman Taemin did not recognize. I am Miran Seo, she said when she noticed his confusion. I work with alien rights advocacy groups. What makes this one different? Taemin asked. Miran touched the holographic display and it zoomed in to show a star system at the edge of known space. The research team that found it was not looking for echo fragments. They were studying pre-war Vorthak technology, but someone had been there before them. Recently. Someone was looking for the echo deliberately. More than that, Dongjun said grimly. Someone was trying to modify it. The room fell silent. Taemin felt a chill run down his spine. Modify it how? Hanul spoke for the first time since greeting him. Her voice was still strong despite her age. The original echo was a weapon designed to destroy mental networks by trapping minds in repetitive loops. But what if someone found a way to control what those loops contained? Taemin began to understand the horrible implications. They could program specific thoughts into people's minds. Exactly. Instead of random mental static, the echo could carry messages, beliefs, commands. It would be the perfect mind control weapon. Woo Bin leaned forward. We have been monitoring communications between different species, looking for signs of who might be behind this. There are rumors of a group called the New Collective. Who are they? Young aliens mostly, Miran explained. Born after the Silent Wars ended. They grew up in the current system, with humans speaking for everyone else. Some of them think it is time for change. What kind of change? Dongjun pulled up another display, this one showing intercepted messages written in various alien languages. They want to end the protocol of voices. They believe their species should speak for themselves again. That does not sound unreasonable, Taemin said. It would not be, if they wanted to develop new, safe forms of communication, Hanul said. But some members of the new collective believe the old ways were better. They think the danger of the echo was exaggerated. They want to go back to direct mind sharing? Worse. They want to use modified echo technology to force their ideas on the species that disagree with them. They think they can succeed where the Vorthak failed, because they will be more careful, more precise. Taemin stared at the intercepts on the display. Even though he could not read the alien languages, he could sense the anger and frustration in the messages. How many people are we talking about? Thousands across dozens of species, Miran said. And their numbers are growing. They are very good at recruiting young aliens who feel frustrated with the current system. Can you blame them? Asked a voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to look at the speaker. A young woman Taemin did not recognize. She had the kind of defiant expression that suggested she was used to disagreeing with people in authority. Yoon Ji-han, Dongjun said with a sigh, our youngest speaker candidate. I am serious, Yoonji said, standing up. These aliens have been silenced for 50 years. They have to let humans speak for them in the most important decisions affecting their lives. Would any of us be happy with that arrangement? The arrangement exists for their safety, Hanul said firmly. Does it? Or does it exist because we are afraid to let them try something new? The room erupted in argument. Some people agreed with Yunji that the current system was unfair. Others insisted that any change was too dangerous. Taemin listened to the debate and realized that the humans were just as divided as the aliens. Dongjun held up his hand for silence. This is exactly the kind of disagreement that the new collective exploits. They point to our own doubts as proof that the system should change. Maybe they are right, Yunji said. And maybe they will accidentally release another echo plague while trying to prove their point, Daeyun snapped. I lived through the first one, child. You did not. Hanul struggled to her feet and everyone in the room fell quiet. I have been the voice for aliens for 50 years, she said slowly. I have spoken words that were not my own, shared thoughts that came from minds I could never fully understand. It has been the greatest honor and the greatest burden of my life. She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. But Yunji is not wrong. The current system is not fair. It was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to be a temporary solution until something better could be developed. What are you saying? So Jin asked. I am saying that if we do not find a way to give the aliens their voices back safely, someone else will find a way to do it dangerously. The new collective exists because we have failed to solve the real problem. Dongjun nodded slowly. The question is, how do we develop safe communication methods when the aliens are too afraid to experiment? And how do we do it before the new collective decides to force the issue? Added Wubin. Taemin raised his hand hesitantly. What if we asked for volunteers? Everyone looked at him. What do you mean? Hanul asked. Some aliens must be willing to take risks for the chance to speak for themselves again. What if we worked with them to develop new communication methods? Small groups, careful experiments with human speakers standing by in case something goes wrong? Miran's eyes lit up. Voice zones. Designated areas where limited mental communication is allowed, with human monitors to ensure safety. It would be dangerous, Daeun warned. Everything is dangerous now, Eunji replied. At least this way we control the risks instead of letting the new collective take uncontrolled ones. Hanul sat back down, looking thoughtful. It could work, but it would require the cooperation of the full council. All 847 species would need to agree to the experiment, which means, Dongjun said, that tomorrow's council session just became the most important one in 50 years. As the meeting ended, Taemin realized that his role as a speaker was about to change dramatically.
Instead of just speaking for aliens who could not speak for themselves,
he might soon be helping them find their voices again. It was a terrifying and exciting prospect. But first, they had to convince 847 different species to trust humans one more time. The species that had broken their ability to communicate safely, and now claimed to have a plan to fix it. Walking back to his quarters, Taemin wondered if the galaxy was ready for such a leap of faith, and whether humanity deserved it. The Great Chamber had never been so full. Representatives from all 847 species packed every available seat, and the air hummed with nervous energy. Colors flashed across Corvani's skin faster than usual. The crystal beings pulsed with light in rapid, anxious patterns. Even the normally calm, flower-like creatures swayed with agitation. Taemin stood at the edge of the heart chamber watching the crowd. In 3 hours of training, he had gone from student to the most important speaker of his generation. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him like a mountain. Are you ready? Sojin asked, appearing beside him. No, Taemin said honestly, but I think that is the point. If I felt ready, it would mean I did not understand what I was asking them to risk. The news had arrived that morning. Another echo fragment had been activated, this time on a small colony world called Haven's Rest. The new collective had attempted to modify it, just as the Council's intelligence had predicted. But something had gone wrong. Instead of creating controlled mind-sharing, they had released a new form of the plague. Haven's Rest now had a population of 12,000 people who could only think one thought. We must be free. They repeated it constantly, out loud and in their actions. They had stopped eating, stopped working, stopped caring for their children. They just stood in the streets saying the same words over and over. The galaxy faced a choice: continue the silent protocols and hope that no one else would be foolish enough to experiment with echo technology, or take the risk of developing new, safer forms of communication under human supervision. The intelligence reports are confirmed, Dongjun announced from his seat in the observer section. The new collective has at least 6 more echo fragments in their possession. If we do nothing, they will try again. Junseo Bayek, a young representative of the Corvani species, had requested permission to address the council directly. It was the first time in 50 years that a non-human had asked to speak in the Great Chamber. The colors shifting across his blue skin showed emotions that Taemin was still learning to read. He is afraid, Wu Bin had explained earlier, but also hopeful and determined. Now Junseo stood at the boundary of the heart chamber, unable to enter but desperate to be heard. His colors formed words that the translation systems converted to text on screens around the chamber. We cannot live in silence forever. Our thoughts are not diseases. Our voices are not weapons. Similar messages came from representatives of dozens of other species. The flower creatures released chemical signals that translated to, "We dream of songs we cannot sing." The crystal beings flashed patterns that meant, "Our light grows dim without sharing," but other species were terrified. The survivors of worlds that had been touched by the original echo sent messages of fear. The silence keeps us safe. Do not risk the madness again. Let the humans speak. It is better than nothing. Taemin looked at Hanul Yoon, who sat in the front row of the human section. At 87, she was too frail to be a speaker anymore, but her presence gave strength to everyone around her. She nodded at him, and he saw trust in her ancient eyes. The moment had come. Taemin stepped into the heart chamber, and the familiar change occurred. The air became thicker, more real. The psychic null field activated, ensuring that his thoughts would remain his own and that his words could carry no mental contamination. He took a deep breath and began to speak. 50 years ago, this galaxy learned a terrible lesson. We learned that sharing thoughts directly can be dangerous. We learned that minds can be invaded, converted, destroyed. We learned that sometimes, the things we create to help people can become weapons that hurt them instead. The chamber was completely silent except for his voice. We humans became your voices not because we wanted power, but because we were the only ones left who could speak safely. We have carried this responsibility for 5 decades, and we have tried to serve you well, but we have always known that this arrangement was not perfect. Taemin looked around the chamber, meeting the alien gazes that he could identify. The young people of your species look at us and ask why they must remain silent. They ask why they cannot speak for themselves. These are good questions. These are important questions. He paused, gathering his courage for what came next. 3 days ago, members of something called the New Collective tried to answer those questions by force. They activated an echo fragment on Haven's Rest, believing they could control it. They were wrong. 12,000 people are now trapped in their own minds, repeating the same thought until they die of starvation or thirst. A ripple of shock went through the chamber. Colors flashed, lights pulsed, chemicals filled the air. The aliens had not been told about Haven's Rest until now. This is what happens when we try to return to the old ways without proper safeguards, Taemin continued. But doing nothing is also dangerous. The New Collective has more echo fragments. They will try again, and each time they fail, more people will suffer. He stepped to the center of the heart chamber, directly under the spotlight that marked the focus of galactic attention. So we propose something new, something that has never been tried before. Voice zones, small areas where limited mental communication will be allowed, with human speakers present to monitor for signs of contamination or invasion. Volunteers from species who are willing to take the risk will work with our linguists and engineers to develop new, safer forms of thought sharing. The reaction was immediate and intense. Some species showed excitement, colors bright with hope, lights pulsing with eagerness. Others showed terror, dark colors, dim lights, the smell of fear chemicals in the air. This will be voluntary, Taemin said quickly. No species will be forced to participate. Those who choose to remain with the current system of human speakers will continue to be served as they always have been, but those who want to try something new will have that opportunity. He looked directly at Junseo Bayek, whose colors were shifting so rapidly that they created a rainbow effect across his skin. We know this is frightening. We know the risks are real. But the risks of doing nothing are also real. The New Collective grows stronger every day, and they will not be careful like we will be. They will not stop when something goes wrong. They will keep trying until they either succeed or destroy half the galaxy. Taemin's voice grew stronger as he reached the heart of his argument. 50 years ago, humanity broke your ability to communicate safely. One desperate man created a weapon that silenced billions of minds. We have spent half a century trying to make up for that mistake by serving as your voices. But the only way to truly make up for it is to help you find your own voices again. He spread his arms wide, encompassing the entire chamber. We are not asking you to trust us because we have been perfect. We are asking you to trust us because we understand the consequences of failure better than anyone else. We will not let another echo plague spread. We will not let fear keep you silent forever. But we need your help to find a better way. The silence that followed was different from the usual silence of the chamber. This was not the absence of communication. It was the presence of deep thought. Across the chamber, representatives consulted with their species through whatever safe communication methods they had developed. Finally, Junseo Bayek stepped as close to the heart chamber as he could get. His colors formed clear, bright patterns that translated to, "The Corvani volunteer to be first." Other species began to respond. The crystal beings flashed agreement. Some of the flower creatures released hopeful scents, but many others showed fear and disagreement. After an hour of consultation, the vote was taken through the traditional method of colored lights. Green for agreement, red for disagreement, yellow for abstention. The result was closer than Taemin had hoped, but better than he had feared. 412 species voted to approve the voice zone experiment. 219 voted against it. 16 abstained. It was enough. As Taemin stepped out of the heart chamber, he felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders again. But this time it was different. Instead of carrying the burden of speaking for those who could not speak, he would be helping them find ways to speak for themselves. The work would be dangerous. Some experiments would fail. People might be hurt or even killed. But the alternative, letting fear and silence rule the galaxy forever, was worse. Junseo Beck approached him as the chamber emptied, his colors showing gratitude mixed with nervousness. "Thank you," the translation system said, converting his patterns to sound. "For giving us hope." "Thank you," Taemin replied, "for having the courage to take the risk." As the two young beings, one human, one alien, stood together in the great chamber, they represented something new in galactic history, not human voices speaking for silent aliens, but different species working together to find better ways to communicate. The silent wars were finally, truly over. The age of new voices was about to begin. In his quarters that night, Taemin recorded a message for the archives. "Today we took the first step toward fixing something that was broken 50 years ago. We do not know if we will succeed. We do not know what new problems we might create, but we know that silence is not the answer. It never was." He looked out his window at the stars.